turn to Capitol Hill now, though. Michael Cohen set to begin his 3-day marathon of congressional testimony just a few hours from now. Up first, a closed session with the Senate Intelligence Committee. A spokesman for Cohen's legal team says it begins at 9:30 a.m. in a classified Senate location. Committee Chairman Richard Burr says it is expected to last 10 hours and that there are no restrictions on what Cohen can discuss in this private session. Tomorrow's testimony before the House Oversight Committee is the only open session. And we're learning more about what to expect from Cohen's public testimony. A knowledgeable source telling NBC News overnight Cohen will provide evidence of criminal conduct by Trump since he became president. We're told he'll draw on his experience as Donald Trump's former fixer to describe alleged racism, cheating as a businessman, and lies. Also, how Trump allegedly inflated the value of his assets to get on the Forbes list and deflated the value of his properties to reduce his tax burden. We're told Cohen also will provide granular detail of Trump's involvement in the Stormy Daniels payoff and cover-up. The former fixer also expected to explain why he lied to Congress about the Trump Tower Moscow deal and whether anyone instructed him to lie. Eugene Scott, Michael Cohen has always been the guy who knows where the political bodies are buried, the business bodies are buried, and that begins today.
Absolutely, and that's one reason why his testimonies will be so valuable. He's one of the few people who can connect the Trump Corporation to the Trump campaign, to the Trump presidency. And so with now Democrats in control of the House, he'll be asked questions that he likely would not have been able or would have had to answer when conservatives who were sympathetic to Trump were controlling things. And he's made clear that he really believes that he wants to use this opportunity to atone for his sins. He believes that he was involved in many of the issues that exist in Trump world that many Americans currently find problematic, and he's hoping to use this opportunity to get some of those things straight. Whether or not Democrats actually trust him is not clear. There's some real questions people still have to ask of him, including whether or not some of his conversations about his false testimony took place with people in the White House before the testimony happened, and honestly whether or not he was offered a pardon regarding what he will say. And so all eyes will be obviously on this testimony. What will come out of it, I think, really is not yet clear.
So, Joe, we've known about Michael Cohen. He's disclosed already a lot of information in public interviews about Stormy Daniels, some of the things about the Trump organization and businesses. But what we're underlining this morning is that Cohen allegedly will talk about evidence of criminal conduct by Trump since he became president in today's closed-door hearing with the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, and I guess really the most important thing for people watching to figure out whether they believe him or not, either on the committee or people watching at home on television, and people who are going to be voting in 2020, is how credible Michael Cohen will be, considering that he's spent much of his career lying for Donald Trump. Will he have any evidence, any substantial, tangible evidence to carry along with him in the form of texts or emails or pictures or documents that he can show the committee? I think, Mika, that's going to be critical for Americans who are trying to figure out who's telling the truth here.
Yes, and on another track, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein indicated that he's advising the Justice Department to limit the release of special counsel Robert Mueller's findings. Rosenstein was responding to a question about reforms to the department and suggested that a public release of Mueller's report related to those not charged with the crime is against DOJ guidelines.
Just because the government collects information doesn't mean that information is accurate, and it can be really misleading if you're overly transparent about information that the government collects. So I think we do need to be really cautious about that. When we charge somebody with a violation, we need to be prepared to prove it by evidence beyond any reasonable doubt. And the guidance I always gave my prosecutors and the agents that I worked with during my tenure on the front lines of law enforcement were, if we aren't prepared to prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt in court, then we have no business making allegations against American citizens.
But the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, says Rosenstein is breaking with the president he said himself when Rosenstein's Justice Department released sensitive documents in the Russia and Clinton investigations at the urging of House Republicans and President Trump. Schiff tweeted last night, "This double standard won't cut it. For 2 years, I sounded the alarm about DOJ's deviation from just that principle as it turned over hundreds of thousands of pages in closed or ongoing investigations. I warned that DOJ would need to live by this precedent, and it will."
David Ignatius, actually, the chairman's argument is not so compelling if we remember what our mothers told us, that two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly.
I mean, the DOJ did a lot of things that were abnormal during the Clinton investigation. The two most significant ones would have been James Comey's press conference after deciding not to indict Hillary Clinton, and then the letter 10 days beforehand. I would think that it would be a bedrock principle that you would not release extraneous information out to the public against people who you're not going to charge in order to protect them, just so hearsay is not floated out and you don't have individuals, again, not charged, being embarrassed or humiliated by Justice Department releases.
Joe, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't put raw FBI files, unsubstantiated rumors out to the public. Comey was unwise to have briefed in such detail about a case where he didn't choose to indict Hillary Clinton, but threw out a lot of dirt anyway. But this is not a question of raw FBI files. This is the report that has been gathered in detail by the special counsel, one of the most respected lawyers in the country, over many months. I mean, we really need to distinguish. And what I think this issue comes down to is material that Mueller has gathered about what would otherwise be a crime, but in our system must be judged politically by the House of Representatives in an impeachment process, by the Senate in a trial. And that goes to whether there's been obstruction of justice in this long Russia probe. That's a lot of what Mueller has been looking at. And I think it's very hard for Rod Rosenstein to argue convincingly that that information should be suppressed. And if he continues to, I think we are heading for one of the classic tests of Congress's authority in a Supreme Court case that will judge whether a congressional subpoena for this material is warranted or not. It's probably some months off, but I think that's what we're beginning to gear up for. So while I agree completely, dishing unsubstantiated rumor, that's a bad idea. This probably is something quite different.
I think we could also,
so.
Jane Harman, knowing who Robert Mueller is, and knowing that he is far more prudent and far more careful than not only James Comey, but most others in the DOJ, we could probably expect that Robert Mueller wouldn't be putting out unsubstantiated information or hearsay in his report. So if we're just talking about releasing the four corners of the report, I'm sure that Robert Mueller is being careful to make sure that doesn't happen regardless.
Yeah, I agree. And I think by the guidelines, the Justice Department has to send a summary of the report to Congress. So there will be something. The question is what will be in it. But to remind, Barr and Mueller have a long history of working together, and they're personal friends. Barr testified to that. I think we ought to thank Mueller for his service, by the way. Also, you just made a reference to mothers, and I have to observe that David Ignatius lost his fabulous mother, Nan, just about a month ago, and I personally mourn her. But back to this, one more comment, Joe. I think that Adam Schiff is onto something. The Hill will get information. There could be a few more indictments before this report is done. I don't know that there won't be. There are no hints about it yet. But these speaking indictments that Mueller does tell a lot of the story that he might not be able to either put in his report or that won't be transmitted to Congress.
I second you on the issue of mothers, especially with what we're going through. Thank you very much. And still ahead on Morning Joe, are there enough constitutional conservatives in the Senate to keep checks and balances alive? It's a good question. Tom Tillis is voting against the president's emergency declaration on the border wall, but who else is with him? We'll run through that as the House is set to vote today. And we want to mention that Joe's band is playing a gig tomorrow night at the Cutting Room in New York City. It kicks off around 7 p.m. Stop by if you're in the area. It's a great time.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.